Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me on this video on the Petroff defense. My name is Charles Galofne, and okay, let's get started. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, we reach the Petroff, and really the Petroff has always been known to be a dual opening, and today it's still known as a dual opening. But with that said, it's a very solid way of playing chess, and there's been a lot of players that have transitioned over to this opening. Nxd7 has played it, and most recently Boris Gelfand has began playing the Petroff. So with that said, I'm going to show you some sidelines or some structures that could come out of the Petroff so that you could assimilate some of the theory. And in addition to that, I'll show you some theory for white so that if you face this opening, you could play against it successfully. So the first main alternative that white has here is the move d4. And this sideline typically continues knight takes e4, bishop d3, d5, knight e5, knight d7. And here white could play for a draw after knight takes f7, or he could capture, bishop takes, castles, bishop d6, c4, c6, pawn takes, and after queen to h5, the best move for black is to castle. And after queen takes d5, bishop c6, he could play for the initiative here. And okay, this is an interesting way and an interesting position to reach as black. Another way that players have tried to claim an advantage is by playing knight to c3, after which black plays bishop to b4, knight e5, castles, bishop e2, rook e8, knight d3, bishop c3, pawn takes, knight e4. Now very important, knight to f4, preventing d5. And yes, white has the two bishops, and this knight can very easily be dislodged after f3. In the middle game, f3 is a completely positionally is a completely fine move in this position, because there's no dark squared bishop for black, and as a result there's no danger in the dark squares. So with that said, let's go back. So the main move is knight takes c5, and now black plays d6. This is the main move. He could make a mistake and play knight takes c4, after which we play queen to e2, queen to e7, queen takes knight, d6. The problem here is that black loses a pawn. And after knight to c6, you could hold on to the pawn by playing bishop to b5, but other players prefer knight to c3, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that so that you can employ it yourself. You could, here in this position, you could play either bishop to f4 or knight to b5, and white should have a slight advantage. So going back, after d6, the main move is knight to f3. Some adventurous players like to play knight takes f7, but personally, I don't like this opening because it's rather chaotic. There's just way too many ways that black could play, and by ways that black can play, I mean that there are different defensive methods that black can employ to get, or rather, to get counter player to get a decent position. So as a result, knight to f3 is typically the main theoretical move. Black captures, we play d4, d5, and after bishop to d3, this is where we've reached the first, one of the main tabias of the opening. Black typically plays bishop to d6, but also bishop to e7 is an alternative. So after bishop to d6, we castle. Black castles, we play c4, c6. These are all the best moves. Now queen to c2, knight a6, a3, bishop g4, knight e5, and here the best move is bishop takes c5. If bishop h5, then we simply capture, and after pawn takes knight c3, white is better. So bishop takes c5, pawn takes, knight c5. If the other knight goes to c5, we play bishop takes h7, and now we play f3, knight takes d3, queen takes d3, knight c5, queen d4, and after knight to b3, we play queen takes bishop, and we have a highly chaotic position. Knight takes rook, bishop h6, g6, and now knight to c3. And in this position, I would rather be white because it seems like white is the only one that could win this game. he basically has the initiative for the rest of the game, and as a result, I advocate this opening for all those that would like to play rather sharply against the Petroff. So going back, if bishop to e7, then we castle. Black plays knight c6, c4, and now the main move here is knight to b4. A lot of players like to play bishop to e2, but I personally like to capture on d5 because it leads to really sharp play, and if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to basically be steamrolled in a matter of seconds. So after knight takes d3, queen takes d5. Notice that knight to f6 doesn't work because of queen to b5 check. So queen takes d5. Rook to e1, bishop to f5, and now the move that I like is knight to e5. We're threatening f3, we're threatening g4, and we're threatening knight to c3. So now black has three options here. He could play knight to d6, he could play g6, he could play f6, or he could castle long. Let's look at those variations. The first one we'll take a look at is f6. After f6, we play knight to c3, threatening the queen, so black has to capture. We capture the bishop, and now there is a tactical trick where you can't capture on e5 because I capture with the rook, and then after I play bishop to g5, you're going to have problems with your bishop. So here, the only move is knight to b5. If knight takes a2, then we play bishop to h6, and we're completely crushing black. So in this position, the only move is knight to b5. We play bishop to f4. And now black has to be really careful. The only move is rook to f8. But if he plays knight takes d4, then we play queen to h5 check, g6. And now, what would you play as white? White plays a very shocking knight takes g6. A rather remarkable move. Queen takes h5, rook takes e7 check, king d8, bishop takes e7 check, king c8, knight takes rook, knight e2 check, and after king h1, we reach a position where white has phenomenal compensation for the queen. So going back, if instead he plays rook to f8, then we play queen to h5 check, g6, queen h3. Now the only move is pawn takes knight, but he has the option of playing knight takes d4. Let's look at pawn takes knight first. After pawn takes knight, we go rook takes pawn, bishop g5, and we're basically up a pawn in this position. So going back, if instead he plays knight takes pawn, then we play knight to d3, and white has an active position. Another alternative is g6, after which we play f3, and here black can very well go wrong. If he plays knight to c5, we play queen b5 check, c6, knight takes c6, pawn takes c6, queen takes knight, queen takes, and after pawn takes, we're up a pawn. So instead, black has the option of playing knight to d6, and then we play knight to c3, queen to a5 only move. Now we play b4, queen takes b4, and queen to e3, and black is basically lost because after castles, we play knight to d5, and there's no way of not losing a piece, basically. So back in this position, black typically castles, after which we play queen to f3, threatening the bishop on f5. The only move is g6, and now we play g4, and this is how we maintain the initiative and the chaoticness in the position. Bishop to h4, knight c3, knight takes, pawn takes, and queen takes queen loses a piece, so black has to play bishop to e6, and now we play g5, and we reach a position where even though it's rather unclear, white maintains the initiative. For instance, after rook h8, we play c4. We can't exchange queens, so rook takes, rook to b1, c6, and now knight takes c6 is good enough for a win.